On a warm summer night in 1912, 8 people went to sleep in a quiet American town, believing they were safe behind locked doors. But before the sun rose, every one of them was dead, their skulls crushed by an axe taken from their own home. And more than 100 years later, the most terrifying part of the Villisca axe murders is not how they were killed, but how the killer vanished without a trace and was never found. In the quiet Midwestern town of Villisca, Iowa, where white wooden houses sat neatly along dirt roads and neighbors trusted one another without question, the night of June 9th, 1912 began like any other, with the Moore family returning home from church unaware that their lives were about to be erased from history in one of the most brutal and chilling unsolved crimes America has ever known. Because sometime after midnight, while the town slept in total silence, an unknown figure entered the Moore residence and carried out what would later be called the Villisca axe murders, a crime so disturbing that more than a century later it still refuses to fade into the past. Josiah Moore, a respected businessman, his wife Sarah, their 4 children, and 2 young girls who were spending the night were all asleep when the killer struck, using an axe taken from inside the home. Not in a frenzy, but with a level of control that suggested experience, patience, and something far darker than rage. As each victim was struck in the head while lying in bed, one by one, the blows so powerful that some skulls were nearly split in 2, yet no one in the house screamed loudly enough to alert neighbors. And even more unsettling was what the killer did afterward, because instead of fleeing immediately, he remained inside the house, methodically covering mirrors and windows with cloth, positioning an axe near the bodies, and even attempting to wash up in a basin, as if trying to erase his presence. And when the bodies were discovered the next morning by concerned neighbors who noticed the house was unusually quiet, the scene inside was unlike anything law enforcement had ever encountered, with blood-soaked beds, crushed skulls, and a sense that the violence had been carefully executed rather than impulsive. Investigators soon realized that the blunt side of the axe had been used on most of the victims, a detail that suggested the killer wanted silence more than speed. And yet, despite the severity of the crime, there were no signs of forced entry, no clear footprints, and no murder weapon definitively linked to a suspect, leading to widespread fear across the town and eventually the entire country as newspapers reported on the horror almost daily, speculating about roaming axe murderers, secret cults, and even demonic forces, because similar axe killings had occurred across the Midwest and South in the years before Villisca, raising the terrifying possibility that a serial killer was moving from town to town undetected. Multiple suspects were questioned, including a traveling preacher named George Kelly, who behaved strangely and allegedly confessed under pressure before later recanting, and a man named William Mansfield, who some believed had a personal connection to the crimes, but none were ever convicted. And as years passed, evidence was lost, witnesses died, and the case slowly went cold, leaving behind unanswered questions that still echo today, especially when people consider the eerie details that never made sense, like why the killer covered mirrors, why he spared nothing and no one, and how he managed to vanish without a trace in a town where everyone knew everyone else. Over time, the Moore house became more than just a crime scene. It became a symbol of unresolved terror. And as decades went by, visitors began reporting strange experiences inside the house, from footsteps heard in empty rooms to doors slamming on their own, children's voices whispering in the dark, and an overwhelming sense of being watched, leading many to believe that whatever happened that night left a mark far deeper than physical violence, as if the house itself remembered the horror and refused to let it rest. And today, the Villisca Axe Murder House stands as one of the most infamous haunted locations in the United States, drawing paranormal investigators, historians, and thrill seekers who hope to uncover the truth or experience something beyond explanation. Yet despite all the investigations, theories, and modern forensic speculation, the identity of the killer remains unknown, turning this case into a permanent scar on American history. A reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are not supernatural at all, but human beings who walk among us, strike in silence, and disappear into the night, leaving behind only questions, fear, and a story that refuses to die.